Okay, in example 2, we're looking at trig expressions in radian angle measures. So if we want to find the sine of negative 5 pi over 6, we're going to first find where that is on the circle by locating a positive coterminal angle between 0 and 2 pi. So if I double the denominator, that's 12 pi over 6 would be 1 revolution in the counterclockwise direction, and negative 5 pi over 6 plus 12 pi over 6 is 7 pi over 6. Half the circle is 6 pi over 6, so 7 pi over 6 is going to be in quadrant 3. And that means the sine of negative 5 pi over 6 is equivalent to the sine of 7 pi over 6. In quadrant 3, tangent is positive, but sine and cosine are negative. So when I rewrite this in terms of the reference angle, I want to remember that the sine of this angle is negative in quadrant 3. So the reference angle of 7 pi over 6, we're headed to the closest x-axis, which is 6 pi over 6, and 7 pi over 6 minus 6 pi over 6 is a pi over 6 reference angle. So I know it's negative in quadrant 3, which makes this equivalent to negative sine of pi over 6. So using our first quadrant hand trick, pi over 6 is our pointer finger, so we bend that one down. Recall the number of fingers on top of the bent finger is the cosine, so the cosine is root 3 over 2. We have one finger below the bent finger, and that tells us that it's 1/2 for the sine. So that makes the exact value negative 1/2. So to check this in the calculator, we are going to need to change into Radian mode. So we'll hit mode and arrow down to radians, press enter, and then we're going to evaluate the sine of negative 5 pi over 6, and then the sine, negative sine of the reference angle, pi over 6, and compare that to our final answer, negative 1/2, right? And in each case, they're equivalent. So I don't have to round anything to 4 decimal places because it's an exact value of negative 1/2. Okay, next we're going to evaluate the secant of 11 pi over 4. And first we want to find where that angle is on the circle. So if I double the denominator, that's 8 pi over 4 would be 1 rotation. So if I subtract 1 rotation of 8 pi over 4, we're headed in the clockwise direction. And 11 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4 is 3 pi over 4. And half the circle is 4 pi over 4, so 3 pi over 4 is in quadrant 2. In quadrant 2, the sine is positive, cosine and tangent are negative, and since the secant is the reciprocal of the cosine, in quadrant 2, the secant would also be negative. So we're going to jot down a reminder here that the angle, or the secant of that angle is negative in quadrant 2. Okay, so now we want to find the reference angle, and the closest x-axis is 4 pi over 4. So we'll take 4 pi over 4 minus 3 pi over 4. And that gets us a pi over 4 reference angle. So the secant of 3 pi over 4 in terms of the sine and or cosine of its reference angle would be a -1 because we're in quadrant 2 divided by the cosine of the reference pi over 4. And in our first quadrant hand trick for the unit circle, we bend the pi over 4 angle, that's our middle finger angle, and the 2 fingers on top, that's the cosine, √2 over 2. The 2 fingers on the bottom, that's the sine, √2 over 2. Since it's negative reciprocal of square root of 2 over 2, we're going to have our negative, and then we'll flip the square root of 2 over 2 into -2 over square root of 2, and then we need to rationalize that denominator and simplify to get negative square root of 2 when the 2's cancel. So now we're going to check that answer in the calculator, making sure that we're still in radian mode, which we are. And secant doesn't have a button on the calculator, so we'll have to enter it as the reciprocal identity 1 over cosine. And our angle was 11 pi over 4. And then we'll compare that to the negative reciprocal of the cosine of the reference angle, pi over 4. And we'll compare that to our final answer, which was negative square root of 2. And each time we get the same answer, so we're going to need to round that answer to 4 decimal places, which would be negative 1.4142. So go ahead and pause the video, try evaluating tangent of negative 14 pi over 6 on your own, and resume the video when you're ready to go over it. So in terms of the coterminal angle, the tangent of negative 14 pi over 6 is equivalent to the tangent of 5 pi over 3. Notice 14 pi over 6 is a little tricky because this fraction is not reduced. The 14 and the 6 are both even, so this does not have a pi over 6 reference angle. When you reduce to negative 7 pi over 3, you see that the reference angle is pi over 3. Since tangent is the quotient sine over cosine, and tangent is negative in quadrant 4, representing the expression in terms of the sine or cosine of the reference angle is negative sine root of pi over 3 divided by cosine of pi over 3. And then the exact value, we take the pi over 3 finger in our first quadrant hand trick, that's the ring finger, and the sine is the bottom 3, so √3 over 2. The cosine is the one on top, that's 1/2, and negative √3 over 2 divided by 1/2 is negative √3 over 2 times the reciprocal, which is 2. Then the 2's cancel, and we're left with negative square root of 3. And then when we check in the calculator, all of those values match, and we round to negative 1.7321 because the 5th decimal place is a 5.